Well, she is the woman behind some of the most meaningful presidential speeches of our time. A pioneer in broadcast television, politics, and more. One of the most prominent voices in the conservative movement, who pulls no punches when it comes to politicians or others, including her most recent column, in which she argues that Jeb Bush has not succeeded in the 2016 race, and she doesn't think he will. For years, articles like that have raised eyebrows among the establishment. But Peggy Noonan says she must write what she really thinks and sees. And she does just that in her new book, The Time of Our Lives. Peggy Noonan, author, former presidential speechwriter, and Wall Street Journal columnist. Welcome to you.
Oh, thank you, Megyn. Thank you for having me here.
The book is a marvel. I have read it myself, and I cannot urge people to read it any more than I do right now. The book, as I see it, is in some ways a love letter to America and about America. And you write in the book that America is the central intellectual subject of my life. This is a great project we are in. Oh. You go through your history, including when you grew up as a young girl, no special background, no money to speak of, but you refer to it as the old America. It knew what it was about. And you talked about how the prevailing culture then still functioned as a protective force, but no longer does, to our detriment. Explain that.
Yeah, I worry about this a lot. There are a lot of unprotected kids out there. They are in families that haven't fully cohered. They are at the mercy of the culture and the street. This is a little bit scary.
When I say it's in some ways a love letter to our country, you talk so fondly about moments of American exceptionalism, and it reminds you of why Ronald Reagan hired this woman. And one of the examples that stood out to me in the book was you read about America being welcoming and free. And if you'll pardon me, I'll read a passage from the book. This is an incident. There was a 7-year-old boy who came over from Germany on the SS Bremen. He was traveling with his younger brother. They were fleeing the Nazis. The Bremen anchored on Manhattan's west side on May 4, 1939, and the children were joined by their father, already in New York. They stood on deck, and then the boy saw something. Across the street from where we were, invisible from the boat, was a delicatessen, which had its name in neon with Hebrew letters. He was startled. Something with Hebrew letters that was impossible back home. He asked his father, "Is that allowed?" And his father said, "It is here. It is here." And tell the audience who that little boy grew up to be.
That little boy from nowhere, finding out he was free in this country and being shocked by the freedom, was the great theatrical director and producer Mike Nichols, my beloved friend who told me that story. When he told it to me, my eyes filled up, and every time I read it, my eyes filled up, because to me, that's just capturing America. I'm not sure we all love America, but sometimes I think, we ought to point out why a little bit more. We ought to talk about it a little bit more. This is a fabulous project we are in. And as it goes through rocky times, I think we ought to be a little protective of it.
And you talk at length about your time working in the Reagan White House. She was a speechwriter for President Reagan, and a great one. And one of the most famous speeches that you helped write for President Reagan, you wrote it and he weighed in as well, was after the Space Shuttle Challenger went down. And I love how you begin that, because we all remember that. And you wrote, "We all wanted to believe there were survivors. It's funny, the power of human denial, even though we saw that spark in the sky." You only had a couple of hours to write that speech.
We had to scramble. I was very lucky that a woman who had been with the president came in and gave me notes of what he had just said in his office. And that became the spine of the speech. But that was a really challenging day.
And as you sat down to write it, needing to come up with something creative, with something powerful, something soothing for the country to be delivered by the commander-in-chief from his desk in the Oval Office, something came to mind. And it was a poem from the 7th grade. Called High Flight, and part of it was incorporated into the speech, and here is how you all may have heard it.
The crew of the Space Shuttle Challenger honored us for the manner in which they lived their lives. We will never forget them, nor the last time we saw them this morning, as they prepared for their journey and waved goodbye and slipped the surly bonds of earth to touch the face of God.
That's some quote.
How did you know he would like it?
I wasn't sure. This is what I thought. I remembered this poem. It was something that went perfectly with the astronauts waving goodbye that morning, which CNN kept showing over and over. So I thought, that is the end of the speech, but I will only hear it if it means something to Ronald Reagan. And we watched, all of us in the speechwriting office, we saw what he said. He used that ending, and then he called me the next morning, and almost the first thing he said was, "How did you know I knew that speech?" And I said, "Oh, Mr. President, I just took a chance." In fact, it had been a speech that was on a plaque outside his daughter Patty's grade school. When he used to take her to school, he used to read it there.
One of the things that comes through in the book is your respect for him and his optimism, which he was known for, but you saw it up close and personal. And something that jumped out at me was you talked about how when he lost the GOP nomination to Gerald Ford in 1976, he called on his volunteers not to be cynical, but to take it as an inspiration, and quoted an old warrior saying, "I will lie me down and bleed a while, and then I will rise and fight again."
Yeah, that still gives me a shiver.
And the book has a theme throughout it, if you ask me, of hopefulness, of trying to return people to what matters, maybe steer a little bit away from technology and back to humanity. And I felt that this was embodied in what you wrote about Tim Russert and his funeral. And the passage begins, I love this, "The world is a great liar." You write about how it shows you that it worships and admires money, but it does not. It says it adores fame and celebrity, but it doesn't. That the world really admires and wants to hold on to goodness and virtue.
Yeah, boy, Tim's death reminded me of that very much. This was a famous, well-off, celebrated guy, but when he died, it pierced your heart. It hit us all like a blow to the heart. And it wasn't because he was famous and rich. It was because he was a good man, a fair man, a kind man, a generous man. He took care of the people he worked with. He took care of his family. And I just wanted to say that. I almost wanted to say it. Young people, nobody's going to tell you the truth, but being a good person is so much more important than the other stuff you're being trained to do.
Again, it is called The Time of Our Lives. I highly recommend it. Peggy Noonan, what a gift. Thank you.
Thank you, my dear.